everyone, and welcome back to the channel where your likes, comments, and subs are always greatly appreciated. For this video, I wasn't going to provide a demonstration or a tutorial. Instead, I wanted to comment on Zoom's recently announced R12 multi-track recorder. So I have not used the R12. I really haven't seen anything about it other than the images and the little bit of information that is given to us on Zoom's website. But I have been an owner of the Zoom R8 multi-track recorder for over 10 years now, and I have been using the Zoom R20 since it came out in late 2021. So I've had it for a good 9+ months now, and I've been using both of these devices extensively for, again, this one for a very long period of time. And I think I have a decent understanding as to how the R12 will work, what the strengths of the unit will be, what will be some of the limitations based off of taking the R8 and the R20 and kind of mashing them together to create that R12 multi-track recorder device. So I've seen a lot of comments in the tutorials that I've been providing for the R20 asking about the R12 and my thoughts on it. I thought I would post this video to give people a general sense or general idea of what to expect, at least for early firmware versions of the R12, in comparison specifically to the R8 and the R20. So the R12 definitely is designed to be the successor to the, again, older R8 model. So this thing has been out for at least 10 years. I think it's probably closer to 12 to 14 years. So the R12 is definitely meant to succeed this. The R20 is the successor to the older R16 model, which has been discontinued by Zoom. You could still find it in different places, but for the most part, Zoom's not selling it directly from their website. They're only selling the R20. What happened between those old R series models and this newer R20 model is that Zoom went with a full color touchscreen. And this touchscreen gives the multi-track unit, the R20, light DAW editing operations that you can use. So instead of just, trying to use markers to copy and paste and edit and trim any audio samples that you recorded on the R8, this is far more advanced and easier to perform those operations on the R20 with the touchscreen. And I've posted a variety of tutorials and demonstrations on that you can go check out those videos. I think a lot of those videos will apply to the R12, but that's what happened in that big change from multi-trackers from a decade ago to the brand new series of multi-trackers that Zoom is releasing right now. They're instituting these touchscreens that give you some light DAW editing operations. It's not fully functional like an awesome DAW is with a great monitor and a mouse, and you can click things with fantastic resolution, but it is a lot better than using the old controls that you've seen in multi-trackers from the past 20+ years. So this is a huge upgrade. If you want to do some light editing without a computer, this thing will get the job done. But for the R12, I wanted to compare it against the R8 and the R20. When comparing the R12 to the R8, I think the first thing to take note of is the price. The R8 has been set at $299 for a long time. I've seen it on sale for $250, maybe even $229 once in a great while. But for the most part, it's been hanging out between $250 and $300. The R12 is set to debut at $299, so the exact same price that they've been asking for the R8 for a long period of time. I'm not sure what's going to happen once the R12 is introduced to the market, but when the R20 hit the market, the R16 was shortly thereafter discontinued. So it may be that Zoom's just going to push the R12 and they'll no longer sell the R8 maybe by the end of the calendar year. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But the price really is the same. So what are the differences between the R12 and the R8? Well, the biggest difference right off the bat is the color touchscreen. So instead of having this orangey looking LCD screen, you'll have a 2.4-inch color touchscreen. So that touchscreen will be smaller than what's on the R20, but still going to be bigger than what you see on this little tiny screen here. And it'll be implemented with touch controls, so you'll be able to drag and drop your audio regions to different tracks. You'll be able to copy and paste and perform those light DAW-like editing features that I alluded to. Beyond that, a lot of the hardware is the same. They both feature 8 dedicated mono tracks. You can link them together, any pair as a stereo track, but I do like when it actually says that it's 8 tracks, that it's truly 8 tracks. Those are 8 mono tracks. Some multi-trackers will tell you that they have 16 tracks, but really they have 8 tracks in mono, and then there's 4 tracks that are stereo. So it's kind of more like a 12 tracker. So this is really with the R8 and the R12 true 8 mono tracks. Outside of that, you'll have 2 inputs. The inputs are combo jacks, so you can plug in XLRs or 1/4-inch jacks, and you will have physical controls to dictate how you want to set these things up. So do you want to put them as mic inputs or high Z input? They both have 1 high Z input. Both of these feature phantom power. So the R8 has phantom power, the R12 has phantom power, but I do think that you have to menu dive on the touchscreen to activate the phantom power for the inputs on the R12. For the R8 or the R12, you can route which inputs will go to which tracks for recording purposes. So you only have those 2 inputs. You can only simultaneously record 2 instruments at the same time, or 2 inputs at the same time. So if you just have something coming in, whether it's like a synth and it's coming in stereo, so those will be coming in maybe in left and right and recording onto tracks 1 and 2, or you could bring them in 1 and 2 here onto tracks 7 and 8 if you wanted to. That's what you could do on the R8. You could, I'm assuming, do the exact same thing on the R12. Other things to note though is even though they both have 2 combo inputs, I do find that the R20's preamps just sound a little bit better than these older R8 preamps that are loaded in here. I do think that the newer preamps on the R20 sound a little bit brighter in the mids and the higher trebles, and just a little bit cleaner. That's my own personal take, but that's what I am sort of picking up when I'm listening to the R20 compared to the R8. I'm guessing that the R12 will use similar preamps that they've installed in the R20. So they're going to use those newer preamps, whatever they've improved upon from the R8. One difference, though, that you will note between the R8 and the R12 is that the R8 has these 2 built-in microphones, and you could switch to the built-in microphones up here for inputs 1 and 2. The R12, it looks like it does not have any built-in mics. So this is great for convenience recording. If you just have like an acoustic guitar and you want to record something really quick, you don't want to plug anything in, you could just activate the built-in mics, and the R8 does a great job of recording that. I mean, they're not the best sounding mics, but they do get the job done. So the other things to note that are differences between the R12 and the R8, once you start to dive into the menus of the touchscreen of the R12, you'll find that there is a synth track there, just like in the R20. I'm assuming that you're only going to be able to use 1 synth track per project. So for the 8 tracks that you have set up, only one of them will be able to be designated as a synth track using the built-in sounds that are cooked into the R12. So right now it looks like it's loaded with the exact same synth sounds that are on the R20. There's 18 different synth sounds plus a drum kit that you could use a MIDI controller to play a drum kit with. To be honest with you, while it sounds nice and it's convenient, and there's even like a grid or a piano scroll that you can edit the notes in that is on the R20, I'm assuming is going to be there on the R12. Those synth sounds are not that great. I've only really used them as placeholders. They work just fine to give me some kind of backing sound when I want to hold a whole note for an extended period of bars, just to fill up the background sound in a section of a song that I'm working on. But in terms of having great synth sounds, they're not that great. You cannot modulate them or adjust them in any way. It's just whatever you get, that's what you get. There really isn't even like a classic piano sound, like a grand piano sound. So you don't even have some of those basic synth sounds that you would love to see loaded. But again, those are things that I think could be updated with a firmware update. So maybe down the line, Zoom will introduce more synth sounds, and that synth track will become a little bit, more convenient to use and more something that you want to actually use in your songs. Right now, that's just not so much the case. So don't get too excited about the Synth Track is my kind of take-home message there. The R12 will also be loaded with a bunch of drum loops. You do have different kinds of drum loops in here with the R8, but they're really through the sequencer. So the R12 comes installed with a bunch of drum loops that you can use. These things are really nice if you're a guitar player. You just want to put something down really quick as a backing drum track that you could play along with, and then maybe later on down the line, you'll go in there and you'll replace that drum track with something else. And so I used to record it with a band and I had a live drummer, but if the drummer wasn't around, I could just put something down really quick with a guitar or a bass and it would sound all right. And then the drummer would fix it with a real drum track later. Now, these days, I'm not really playing with the band, so I'll just use a drum machine. But it's still kind of nice to just drop in some loops, put something down, and give yourself a backing track to play with. So the R12 is fully outfitted with those drum loops, and they're not bad. They're usable. The other things to consider are the inputs. And so the R12 comes with USB-C. The R8 comes with the older, it's not even a mini USB-A, it's actually a micro USB. So that's a much older type of port. So it's got a micro USB port that you can use for power. And that's really all that you're using this for is power. And then also you can use it as a controller to plug into a computer to act as a controller for your DAW. For the R12, same sort of story, but it does have USB-C. So that's kind of nice. The nice thing about it being a USB port is that's where the power is coming in. So you can plug this thing into like a USB power bank instead of just using the included wall adapter that they give you. You do have to note that sometimes, depending on what kind of USB cord you're using and what your USB source is, it will introduce some noise. I have plugged this thing into different types of USB like batteries, rechargeable batteries, and sometimes it introduces noise. So something to take note of, but it is nice that since it can't be powered through USB, it's always ready on the go. You could plug this thing in with a variety of different chargers you probably have laying around your house. But with that, in terms of the ports, the one nice port that the R8 has is it has a foot switch port. And that foot switch control allows you to do a couple different things. You can use it to play and rewind and play and stop, but you can also use it to punch in and punch out for your recording. So if you wanted to fix a guitar solo, like one little spot, the rest of the guitar solo sounded great, you want to fix like 2 notes and you just want to punch it in really quick with a foot switch, the R8 offers that ability with its control in jack. The R12 does not have that. So that's one of the big things that you're going to be missing is like the built-in mics and that control foot switch that the R8 features. The other thing to kind of note is that while this thing has all these different physical controls and you might be envious of the color touchscreen that the R12 has, I find myself suffering sometimes from touchscreen fatigue with the R20 as I'm going through all the different menus and I have to touch every single thing on the screen. Occasionally, I do miss the physical controls that are present on the R8. It has a great jog dial, it's very clicky, and all of these different controls work really well for laying down markers instead of having to always touch something on the screen. So it may seem great to have that beautiful color touchscreen, but don't disregard how nice it is to sometimes have all these physical controls right in front of you. Other mini things to kind of think about is that the R8 does have a sequencer that's built in, so you can use it to sequence drum tracks for yourself. It's usable. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's not bad. If you wanted to build your drum loops step by step, you could do that with the R8's built-in sequencer. The R12 does not have that. It only has the preloaded audio tracks that are drum loops, and you can use those to just copy and paste them over and over and over again. And I've made a video on that kind of stuff with the R20. I'm sure it's going to work the exact same way for the R12. That unique sort of sequencer with these sample pads down below with the R8 that you can use to trigger different drum sounds, it's kind of nice and unique to the R8 and the older R24. Those units have those sample pads on the bottom along with that drum sequencer. One other thing that you'll kind of get is instead of just having 8 faders and a master fader, there's another fader here that is just the effects fader. So you can adjust how much the effects volume or level, I think, is present using those faders. And that's actually kind of a cool addition that you'll have on the R12 compared to the R8. Both of these also feature a lot of built-in effects. They feature Zoom's classic effects that they've been making in a lot of their effect guitar pedals for years and years and years. I think the effects on the R8 and the R20 are pretty good. The nice thing about the R20 though is that you can hook it up to your computer, install this piece of software called Guitar Lab, and you can bring in more effects on the R20. I'm assuming that the R12 will do the exact same thing, that you could bring in more and more effects onto the R12, whereas whatever you get loaded with the R8, that's just what you get. You can't change it. You can make adjustments on the levels, but you're not going to be able to introduce new effects on the older R8 model. One thing though that the R8 has built into it are a series of mastering effect patches, which are kind of nice, that once you've recorded all your tracks and you want to complete that final mix down to a stereo track, you can apply a mastering effect patch, which will then apply usually some kind of digital EQ along with compressors and limiters to give you a nicer polished sound. It's not as perfectly polished as you could get in a high-powered DAW with a person who's has some experience with mastering, but for a newbie to really just finish off your tracks, it does kind of do a nice job of giving you a final product that's going to sound a lot better with those mastering effects applied than it would be if you just mixed down your 8 tracks into a stereo track and you didn't really compensate for some of that compression and limiter that you might need in there to tighten things up and glue it all together with a nice EQ. The mastering effects that are available on the R8 do kind of like a nice job for anybody who doesn't have a lot of experience. Just turn one of those on and you're going to get something that's better than nothing. The R20 does not have any of those mastering effect patches loaded in there. You can make your own and kind of do it yourself. I've done that. It works okay. But I do sort of miss the nice patches that they had on the R8. I'm assuming that the R12 will suffer from the same thing, where it will not have those mastering patches that the R8 features. So overall, I think the R12 is going to be a nice upgrade over the R8. The only way that I would recommend the R8 for anybody else, since they both run on battery power, so they're both portable, they could both be plugged in with USB, and you can use USB power to kind of get both of these things operational. The only thing that I would point to is, if you want to get the are you thinking R8 versus R12, is, well, price. I wouldn't pay $299 for this, with the R12 maybe coming out a month later at the same price of $299. But if this thing drops in price and you can get it closer to $200, that's something to consider. If you hate the touchscreen controls and you want physical controls, the physical controls here are actually really nice. But the two things that I think are truly different are the built-in mics and that foot switch control for punch in, punch out recording. Those are the two big differences, I think, between the R8 and where the R8 has an advantage over the R12. Otherwise, I think the R12 is going to be a better value for most people. Okay, so we also should compare the newer R20, which at the time of this recording has only been out for about 9-10 months, to the unreleased R12, which should be out sometime in late October. The first thing to note is price. So this thing came out at $399 US. It quickly went up to $449 US, but it was recently on sale all the way down to $299. And after that sale from August of 2022, it went up to a price of about $350 US. So it's been stable at $350 US. I don't know if it's going to stay there. I'm kind of guessing that Zoom's going to bring it back up to $399 after they release the R12 at $299. That's my own guess, my own speculation, so don't quote me on that. But we've seen the price of this thing all the way down to $299. If you see this at $299 compared to the R12 at $299, I think you get the R20 almost every single time, other than if you need a battery-powered multitracker. So this one is not a battery-powered multitracker. It needs 11 watts or 11 volts of power through the DC-in adapter, whereas the R12 can be run off of 4 AA batteries. They could be alkaline batteries, or you can get rechargeables, or again, like I said, it has USB-C that you can power the unit through that USB-C using a variety of USB power sources. Outside of that, though, the obvious differences are this thing is a 16-track recorder with true 16 mono tracks compared to the 8 mono tracks of the R12. The R12 will allow you to simultaneously record 2 tracks, whereas the R20, you can simultaneously record 8 tracks. Now, of those 8, only 2 of them are going to be combo inputs that will support quarter-inch jacks. The rest of these are going to be XLRs. The 2 jacks on the 2 combo jacks on the R12, one of them supports high Z, and both of them support phantom power. The R20 has 4 XLR inputs here that will support phantom power. So, do you need to record 8 tracks simultaneously, or are you happy with just 2 tracks at one time simultaneous recording? If it's just 2 tracks, especially if there's going to be a price difference, okay, maybe the R12 is going to be the more appropriate buy for you. But if you're recording a band like all at once, you're plugging in a whole bunch of instruments at one time, you're going to need the R20 versus the R12. Or if you have acoustic drums and you want to plug in 4 to 8 different mics to mic up your drums, you're going to need the R20 versus the R12. Otherwise, you're going to have to get a mixing board and bring that into the R12, and you probably don't want to go that route. So the R20 is going to serve you better if you've got acoustic drums that you want to mic up all the time, or you're recording multiple instruments all the time. Once you kind of get through that, other things to consider that are a little bit different are the headphone jacks. The headphone jack here is a 1/4-inch jack, whereas on the R12, it looks like it's a 3.5 millimeter jack, but that's not a big deal. You could always just buy a cheap adapter to kind of fix that. What I do like on the R12 is that there are knobs to control the volume level for both the phones and for the monitor out on the top of the unit. So the control for the volume level for the phones on the R20 is on the back side here, and you can get to it, but it's not that accessible. I like the idea of on the R12 that you can fine tune and adjust those knobs at the top, compared to on the R20, it's tucked in the back here, and there's no knob to control the monitor out volume. On the R20, you have to menu dive in the touchscreen to get to that. Once you get past that, there's some differences though that the R20 is just better at compared to the R12. One, the faders look to be longer. So while you still have the same, volume control in the faders I think are tighter on the R12. At least that's what it looks like from the pictures, and it wouldn't surprise me it's a smaller unit, smaller footprint. But this is going to be a little bit easier for you to get that fine-tuned adjustment. If you just want to tweak your levels a little bit, it's going to be easier to do that here on the R20 where you have those bigger faders compared to on the R12. The screen itself is also going to be a big difference. This is a 4.3-inch color touchscreen that features 480 by 272 pixels, whereas the R12 is a 2.4-inch screen that's 320 by 240 pixels, so less pixels in a smaller screen. The touchscreen on this, it works fine, it's responsive, but don't expect it to work as great as like a new iPhone or a new Samsung Galaxy or Pixel device. It's not going to be that responsive. Think of it more as like a cheap Android tablet. It's got a little bit of lag here and there. It could be a little bit clunky at times. Gets the job done. You can work with it. It is in a lot of ways better than some of those physical transport controls that you'd see like on the older R series. You do suffer from touchscreen fatigue. I wish this just also had a jog dial, but you can do more with that touchscreen compared to just physical controls. That is absolutely true. The other thing to consider too is what you're going to use the ports for. You can plug in a MIDI controller like a keyboard to use that synth track through the USB port here. So they both have USB-C. The R20 and the R12 both have USB-C, but the R12 is going to need that USB-C port for power delivery. So unless you're powering the R12 with AA batteries, you're going to need to use the MIDI port, or you're going to need to use that USB-C port to deliver power to the R12. Well, the R20 has its power coming in through a dedicated port right here. So it leaves the R20's USB-C port always open. You could plug in a USB flash drive to store your projects on there, or you could always plug in a keyboard, and this will power the keyboard as well if you've got a MIDI controller. So if you plan on using the synth track and you want to use a MIDI controller more, it's going to be easier to do so with the R20. You're always going to have to use batteries with the R12 to be able to pull that off because you only have that one USB-C port. Additionally, you can't use this thing with battery power, right? So you're always stuck with this larger footprint. It kind of just, for me, stays on the desk. With my R8, I still have it from 10 years ago, and I still use it even though I have an R20 because it is portable. It's kind of nice to just take it to any room that I want to, whereas the R20 really just always stays on my desk. I did mention briefly that there is a extra fader on the R12. That's a blue fader, and it's, I think, dedicated for just the effects level. So you can adjust the effects level on the fly. That would be kind of nice, especially during mixdown, if you want to kind of tweak the effects levels a little bit. I wish the R20 had a dedicated effects fader to adjust the levels in real time. You can do it through the touchscreen, but again, your menu diving in the touchscreen, it's not great or easy to do that all the time when you're actually like doing some sort of playback or recording. The other thing is, again, like I mentioned, the touchscreen, it's serviceable. It kind of works like an older Android tablet. When you're doing pinch to zoom to really blow up your audio track so you could try to trim it, or you're trying to nudge it just maybe a 30-second note over in place, that could be kind of hard to do when you're always pinching to zoom because it's not as responsive as, again, a newer iPhone. What I saw from the pictures, and I don't know if how this is going to work, but it looks like the R12 features little zoom buttons, like a plus and a minus zoom button at the top of the screen there that you could probably click to zoom in with those buttons. I would love it if the R12 offered me pinch to zoom, but also had those little zoom buttons that I could just touch and click on to zoom in and zoom out in a much easier, more precise way. So I don't always have to do the pinch to zoom with the R20 since it isn't as responsive as I would like it to be. The other cool thing that is listed for the R12 that's not with the R20 yet is something that Zoom is calling sequence play. This is a question that's popped up in the comment section of some of my R20 videos that people have asked, can I use the R20 on stage to just kind of play some backing tracks over and over again? And I haven't recommended that to those people that they do that because it just takes a couple seconds to always go through the projects here to load up a new song. So you can't really just set up like 8 songs in a row to play a mini set with the R20 as like backing tracks. You're going to plug this into your PA as like the monitor out, and then maybe you've got your drums back here with some extra guitars, and then you're going to play a guitar with vocals on stage by yourself and use this as something that you recorded previously. It can't do that. The R12 on the projects menu, there's projects, templates, and there's something else that's called sequence play up at the top. And it looks like you might be able to program in a number of steps or a number of different projects, songs, if you will, to play in order. That could be kind of cool. I have no idea how it works, but it seems like that is a feature that is available on the R12 that right now isn't on the R20. If you think about it though, those things could probably all be fixed with firmware updates. So if Zoom is working on the R12 to have those features, I could very easily see the those zoom buttons, the plus and minus zoom buttons, instituted into the Zoom R20 screen so you could zoom in and out without having to use the pinch and zoom. But the sequence play seems like another thing that they could just add with a firmware update on the R20 after they've perfected it on the R12. So maybe the R20 gets better over time as they're also working on the R12. The last thing to kind of note is that the R20 also features an extra jack here, or port, for a Bluetooth adapter. Now, I've made a video about this, and Zoom was highlighting that they're going to have this Bluetooth adapter with an app that'll run off iOS devices, whether it's an iPad or your iPhone, and you can control the R20 remotely with that Bluetooth adapter that you can plug into the R20. It's an optional adapter. You don't have to buy it, but Zoom's been kind of advertising it on their website since they released the R20 unit. But there's still no app. It's been 9-10 months later, still no app, and I'm not anticipating an app coming out until the very end of 2022 now, and it may even bleed over into 2023. I do think Zoom will still release that Bluetooth app for control purposes on your iPhone, but I don't know when it's coming anymore. The R12 does not have that port, so there's not going to be any ability to bring a Bluetooth adapter into the R12 so it could work with that app. So it could be that that app is awesome. It's going to be great for controlling things on your R20 remotely. I don't know. I mean, obviously nobody's seen it yet because Zoom hasn't released it still, but the possibilities there for expansion that the R20 could be controlled by that app, that will not be the case with the R12. And with all of this, I think the last thing to consider is if Zoom has replaced the older R16 with the R20, and they're going to replace maybe the R8 with this newer R12, will they replace the R24 with an R28 at some point down the road? And would that be the best device to get? And should you wait to get that device? I have no idea if Zoom is working on that. It seems like it would make sense that they would work on it, replace their whole line of multi-trackers, but it could be that they're just going to stop at the R20 and use this as their flagship model. Not exactly sure. So it probably depends on how well the R20 is selling. Seems like it's been selling well enough to introduce an R12 unit. Maybe they release an R12, 28, and it has everything that you want, especially for the people who are asking for 8 combo jacks for simultaneous recording. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but it's at least something to consider. What that price point would be, I have no idea, but maybe Zoom is just learning over time, trying to perfect a product, and they've come out with the R20. The R12 is going to improve on that a little bit. Maybe firmware updates will then come over to the R20, and then eventually, maybe in 2023 at some point in time, they release an R28. I have no idea. But to sum things up, I think you have to consider, if you're really thinking about a multi-track recorder and you want some light editing features that you just can't really do easily on other multi-trackers, that you want to do copy and paste, you want to move different audio regions around, you want to be able to trim things up all within this one box without having to go to a computer, the R20 is a great unit, and it looks like the R12 will also serve that purpose fairly well. Then it comes down to price. If you could find this for $299 on sale again, compared to an R12 that's going to be $299, to me, it's for most people, just go ahead and get the R20. You're going to have twice as many tracks, more things to work with a bigger touchscreen. It really, I think, comes down to the portability, though, for a lot of people. If the price is going to be somewhat different, at least $50 to $100 different. If you want to use an R12 that can run off battery power all the time, and you're not really so much worried about plugging in a USB MIDI controller that much, the R12 might be the multi-tracker for you, especially if you're kind of like a solo artist and you're never recording with a band, especially if you're not recording acoustic drums where you're going to need 8 inputs to record those acoustic drums. If it's just really you recording things, singer-songwriter by yourself, the R12 could be a really good unit for you that's affordable, it's compact, you could run it off battery power, and it's still going to give you those light DAW-like features and editing features that you just can't find on other multi-trackers. But for a lot of other people, I think you may want the extra 16 tracks that are available with the R20. That could just be a little bit better for you, and a little bit more future-proof if you do start playing with a band, or you want to just lay down more and more tracks to build more complicated and more complex songs. I think that's something that you have to consider. So that's all I have for the video today. I hope you found it somewhat helpful. If you have some comments or questions about the R20, the R8, or the new R12, I'll do my best to answer them in the comment section below. But with that, I'll still continue to make tutorial videos for the R20, and I think a lot of them with the touchscreen and the software that's here will be applicable to the R12. So you could watch those if you are buying an R12 and get yourself familiar with Zoom's software and their interface. So with that, that's all I've got for you today. Hope it was helpful, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.